Welcome, my name's Kara-Leah from the Yoga Lunchbox, and I'm here today with Cameron Shayne, he who is the founder of Budokan University. He's a yoga teacher and also a martial artist. And if you were at Wanderlust New Zealand or Australia recently, you might have had the privilege of catching one of his classes. I didn't get a chance to interview Cameron before Wanderlust, so after doing his class, I was like, right, I gotta, get this man on video. So here we are to have a chat about a few things. Welcome, Cameron.
Thank you, dear. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Now, for those that don't know you, can you just give us a little bit of background? You're a yoga teacher. When did you first get into yoga? How did that happen?
Well, I actually don't consider myself really a yoga teacher. I consider myself, I am a teacher, but I think, the term teacher for me really shows up as, an overarching concept. I think I identify myself as a teacher because I make a living facilitating a space for people to come in and learn about themselves. Mm-hmm. So I think it's fair to call myself a teacher. I think that's a fair title. But for me, yoga, martial arts, movement, painting, music. I mean, I'm an artist primarily, and even that's a box in itself. Mm. But my nature is to look at the world in an abstract way, a comical way, satire, sarcasm. I see the world in far more. I see the abstract within the ordinary as on a daily basis. That's just sort of my interaction with the world. So when people attempt to sort of confine me to a particular profession or a particular title, I find myself sort of resisting in itself that, because I'm like, well, I'm still discovering who I am, and that changes for me, maybe every moment, every day. But I can say one thing, at times I'm a teacher, and at times I'm a student, and at times I'm a master, and at times I'm a neophyte, and at times, I can be, anything that shows up in the universe, because everybody, is dancing like that. That's the dance we're doing. So I think it makes it easier for human beings when you categorize yourself as something, because it helps us to then, in our own minds, put each other in the little convenient boxes and go, okay, she's this and he's that, and, so that we can navigate more quickly through people, through society. But really, if there's anything that I feel most in alignment with, it's as an artist. And Budokan for me was a way for me to express art through movement. So I also paint, I also write, I also create music. I'm an actor. I find that the best way to educate people is through art and entertainment. Mm-hmm. I look back on my childhood, and I think the most interesting teachers that I had were also the most entertaining teachers. They were the most inspiring because they knew how to hold the attention of the or certainly my attention through being creative, through being charismatic, through being funny, or at least they had a skill to grab something in me and make me curious and interested and engaged.
You're right.
So that's how I like to teach. A lot of people find that to be difficult because they would like you to teach them in a very linear way. They would like to be taught the way they think. People think in a linear manner, so they'd like to be taught in a linear manner. Whereas for me, I think in abstract terms or in abstract ways, and therefore I like to teach through provocation. I like to provoke thought. I like to provoke people to think about things they may have not thought about in ways they may have not thought about them. Rather than tell people what the answer is, I like to throw something out and get people to reflect upon it.
Okay, so let's move away from putting you in any kind of box or giving you any kind of title, because it obviously. Okay. And I can see how, because you are perceived as a yoga teacher, as soon as someone says, "Oh, what do you do? Why teach yoga?" You're right. There's this whole lot of expectations that this person all of a sudden doesn't see you. They're seeing their projection of what a yoga teacher is and what that means. So let's toss that right aside.
Sure.
When did you first do yoga, and how did you end up doing yoga? Or let's take it back a step. What is yoga? Let's start with that.
Well,
let's lay groundwork.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I define yoga as I tend to accept the etymology of yoga, which is, of course, Sanskrit, in the definition being rooted in the concept of concentrating on a single point, or to yoke into a single expression. So for me, I understand yoga that way.
Yeah.
How you understand yoga and how someone else understands yoga is subjective to your own experience and to your relationship with yoga. So for me, I relate to yoga very well through that particular vantage point. So when I think about doing anything where I'm concentrating, where my mind is in a single place, that is yoga to me. So I could be practicing yoga, riding my bike, mowing the grass, cleaning the car, driving. So I do not limit yoga to asana, postural work. I do not limit yoga to any of what I consider to be the trappings of what we call yoga. Because as soon as you define yoga, it limits its potential effect. And so I find yoga to be as broad as the concept of God, which is, again, is the minute you give God a characterization, a definition, God has to be limited to a word. And because words are the way we convey our understanding of the universe, and which is completely limited. And so why would you even believe you could understand yoga any more than you could understand God?
But as you say, we do need to have a way of communicating through concepts which necessitate words as such. All right.
Well, the important thing is if you understand that it is a concept, then you can behave with it in that way. But it's when you believe that the concept is the absolute truth, rather than understanding that the concept is just a part of what's possible, a part of your own subjective experience. Then you can discuss things and without getting stuck on being right.
Yeah. Okay. So now you see, I understand why your article last September. So last September, you published an article called "Hot Sex for Real Yogis: Can I Have Sex with My Yoga Teacher?" And I read the article, and there was about, 180 or 200 comments at the bottom. And then you wrote follow-up articles, and it went huge in the yoga blogosphere. Yeah. Reading through that, I read most of the comments, but I just began to feel like I was drowning. Like, what is going on here? Like, you really pushed some serious buttons, and it didn't feel like there was a lot of actual dialogue of exploration, but a lot of button pushing going on. But now I understand why that would have happened, because of where you're coming from. First, you don't really identify with being a yoga teacher per se. So let's talk about that article, because the people watching have no idea what it was about. What were you saying in that original article?
Well, I decided that there was a lot of dialogue going on in the yoga community about some of the gurus, modern yoga gurus, dating or having sex with or being accused of sexual misconduct, even sexual criminal behavior with their students. And I noticed how it was so interesting that everyone was coming to the conclusion that these sort of maniacal men were taking advantage of these innocent females in these different situations. And what, again, to be very clear, absent of criminal behavior, okay, we're not talking about rape, we're not talking about sexual assault, we're talking about a consenting adult male dating a consenting adult female, and both of these individuals making a conscious choice to enter into an intimate relationship. As far as I'm concerned, as far as my understanding of the universe, as far as my understanding from my own experience as a teacher for 30 years, I think that there is certainly a responsibility of the teacher to understand that the student that comes in to learn from this individual, female or male, it's irrelevant. It's important for the teacher to understand the dynamic that's at play with this student. I completely understand that. It's also equally as important and a responsibility for the student to understand the dynamic that's at play with the teacher. These are two consenting adults. These are not kids. It's not the adult teacher and the child student. These are equal adults that outside of a yoga classroom are both held accountable on equal terms under all conditions. And so now we're going to make a special exception because this person is now in a yoga room, in a yoga environment. We're going to somehow place a power differential in place that immediately suggests that this consenting adult female has now somehow has lost the capacity to think for herself and to make rational decisions for herself or hisself. And I'm sorry, but I do not reach that same conclusion when I look at it from a reason and logic-based standpoint. I understand that it happens. I understand that people take advantage of each other, but that occurs under every condition that exists on the planet, not just a yoga room.
So just to be really clear, you were looking at what was going on in terms of some of the sexual scandals coming up in the yoga world. And then you wrote an article looking at, well, what's the deal when you've got two consenting adults, one of whom is a student, one of whom is a teacher? How come they're not allowed to have a relationship? How come we're still looking at it and saying teachers can't date students when they're both consenting adults? That's in a nutshell. Because we're still, yes, correct. Because we're still looking at teachers as gurus, and that model for me is antiquated.
I do not accept that model. I'm not in war with that model. I just simply don't think it's necessary, and I don't know that it's ever been necessary, and I don't know that it's ever been effective overall. I know there are instances where it has certainly been produced good fruit. And I know that there are lots and lots of instances where it's produced bad fruit. And I say good and bad being that it wasn't the desired outcome for either party. And that's what I mean by good and bad, because I don't believe in good and bad either. I just simply believe that, things are as they are. But I will say this, when you have people projecting onto another human being some type of authority, some type of knowing that they themselves have surrendered, that they should just be looking for within themselves, and they turn that over to another individual, there's the problem in and of itself. Because a competent, clear adult, female or male, is not a victim and not vulnerable to anything other than the choices that they make. And we're all vulnerable to that. Our choices are our choices.
The reality is, though, in any given classroom, that there are people who are still in victim mode, who are still giving away their power. And if they are attracted to a teacher or the teacher is attracted to them and they are still in that position, they're not actually making a rational choice because it's their unconscious belief, and they're being limited, in effect, by the fact that they're still giving away their power and sitting in victimhood and working with that. So then what happens if there is a potential relationship evolving between a teacher and a student that is still giving away their power? Does a teacher then, who theoretically can see that, have a responsibility to say no? Or
Well, I digress back to my original statement that the teacher is as responsible for understanding the dynamic that's at play as the student is. This is not about removing accountability and responsibility. It's about the freedom and the right to choose. Because as a female, do you feel you have the right to choose whether you would like to have an abortion or not have an abortion?
I think that is kind of disingenuous to move it all the way over there. I do
Oh,
know.
no, I'm just asking a question. I'm just asking, do you feel that you have the right to make that choice for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. But I also
Okay.
know I've
So,
made bad choices with men in the past because of what was going on with my own state. And therefore, I could see that that could happen with some women where they make a bad choice with a man. And if he was a yoga teacher, then there is an imbalance. But just going back, I think what people missed in your article, and you just said it, was that there is always accountability on both sides. So in that particular instance, the yoga teacher should be aware of what's going on and choose not to get involved because of the dynamic at play. And that's what you're in essence saying, aren't you? That there shouldn't be a blanket rule.
I am in essence saying that both parties are always accountable for the choices that they make, and that I do not believe in the concept of victim in the way that most people play with that term. I understand the etymology of the term victim comes from the judicial system. Its origin is back from the days of the ancient Hebrews, where victim really came from the term of sacrifice, scapegoat. So when you were a victim, you were a bit of a person who was being sacrificed for something. So this particular term stayed and it was adopted, and it sort of stayed within the judicial system. So when someone says I'm a victim, for me, the first thing I'm curious, has there been a crime committed, something that that can be looked at and see that there is a particular law broken? And if not, then what I'm left with is story. People have stories. You can date someone and you might want it to go one way and they want it to go a different way, and it just doesn't go how it goes. And then someone says they're the victim of someone else's dishonesty or someone else's lack of emotional availability. I mean, we have stories that we create around our victimizations. So outside of criminal misconduct and misbehavior, when we're talking about two consenting adults that enter a relationship, I don't care how you frame it. The bottom line is, outside of criminal misconduct, these two individuals made a conscious choice, and they're both accountable. And it's their work that they entered that to learn something, whether it's a comfortable lesson or a painful lesson. That's just the way life goes. It's all story as to how you want to frame it. So, are we going to make law or policy around every possibility that occurs or that could occur in an individual's reality? Because one person's story was they were taken advantage of by this yoga teacher, and the yoga teacher's story is completely different. So who do we believe? So because now we've got to side with someone. Now, I'm not talking about criminal misconduct. I'm not talking about rape or some sexual assault. I'm talking about a consenting adult male dating a consenting adult female, and them both coming away with this thing, having a story, both of them. So I'm curious as to why we always seem to side with the student in this case. I just find it interesting. I think they're both accountable. I think they both made a choice, and I think that that's their work to do. And I think that could the teacher be misbehaving? Absolutely. Could the student be misbehaving? Absolutely. And the bottom line is, for me, I wrote the article in order to provoke people to actually consider the fact that there is no real answer here. You cannot control human beings. When you try to do that, you take away their own capacity to think for themselves. It's up to two adults to decide what their destiny is going to be. I'm not going to step in and make rules so that two consenting adults cannot figure out how to navigate through their own love lives, through their own spheres of intimacy. I think that is debilitating. I think it's a step backwards for us as a species. I think to move forward is to start holding everyone to personal accountability for all of their pain and their story and their truth, and stop letting people, play these roles of victim and the thing with the article is what wore me out ultimately, just what exhausted me was the fact that so many people believed that they were right about the position, that it was absolutely true that there should be policy, that it was unethical, and that it was absolutely true that it's ridiculous to consider this as having weighing out its possible problems. It's every moment needs to be addressed as a unique individual experience. In other words, you cannot clump together stories of teachers and students coming together and then build policy off that. What you have to do is, in order to make any intelligent choice, you have to look at each individual situation as it is unique, and then work with that. And that would take so long to dig into so much that it's an impossibility.
So how do you know then that you're absolutely right on this?
Well, there is no absolute right or wrong. There's only the constant state of curiosity.
So you still feel curious around the situation?
Absolutely. I think it's a very curious situation. How do I can only tell you what I believe is correct for me. I cannot tell you what is correct for you. And that is what the Orthodox yoga community would like to do. It would like to make a policy that says, we'll tell you, grown adult 45-year-old woman, mother of 3, who you can and cannot date. I'm sorry, I disagree.
Okay. My mind's just taking in a few things there. So on a practical level, I know that some yoga schools, when they look at the ethics of this, rather than a blanket, teachers don't date your students, they suggest that if there is a situation arising where there's some kind of romantic, going on with the student, that you, before taking any action, go and discuss it with a peer. Just go and check in. What do you think's happening in this situation? What's actually going on? What am I not seeing, etc. Before you take action. Do you think that's a wise move?
If that's what an individual feels is wise for them, I think it's wise. Again, your truth is your truth. If you believe that is the proper course of action, then I think you should follow your intuition. If you're following that course of action because you are obligated to, because you are under the rules of a particular school or business, then I think you should honor the rules of the school that you've agreed to honor. So if that's what the policy is, then you should follow policy because you agreed to do that. So your word is important. If you've made no agreement to do such a thing, then it's left up to you and your intuitive process to guide you in which direction is correct for you.
The thing is, though, the ego is a really wily thing. And I totally get what you're saying, and I do see the sense in it. And yet I also understand what people are saying around policy, because we have blind spots and we fool ourselves and we rationalize, and we get stuck without even realizing it. So we fall into traps. But I guess what you're saying is that when that happens and you fall into not such a great situation, it actually shows you where the work is to be done.
My God. Yeah, why don't we take away all the mistakes you've made and see who you would be right now? I think it's so interesting that we would like to protect people from themselves. We would like to protect them from their own experiences. I mean, my goodness, I can't say there's been a single individual I've ever been in an intimate relationship with or not intimate relationship with where I have not learned exactly what I was supposed to learn from it. I mean, the best and the worst, if you want to play that game of best and worst. But I just simply think it just simply reflects fear. I do not make decisions based on fear. If other people would like to, they're welcome to do that. But I've worked for 42 years of my life to become aware of what I am afraid of and to work out of that story. And so when I take action, I don't take act. I do not, because we all get stuck. I'm just a human like anyone else. But my daily work is to act out of intuitive, aware, courageous mind and out of story.
What about those people, though, that haven't done 40 odd years of work on awareness? What about those people who are just starting on that journey and they're maybe a year in and they really don't...
That's their work. How are they going to get to the next level if they don't make their mistakes? I didn't get here by doing it all right. I got here by making mistakes. So if we don't let people make mistakes, it's like growing your children. I have a child. I have a daughter. I've got to let her go out there and make her mistakes. And if she doesn't, how is she going to evolve and learn what is real and not real? What is story and not story? How does she ever awaken if she doesn't have pain? So I think it's interesting that we want to protect each other from having any pain when pain is the only thing that actually grows us.
You might have just hit the nail on the head there. Like, it's so intense. There's this massive assumption made in the way that we live in society that we want to protect each other and protect ourselves from pain. What if we get rid of that assumption and toss it out the door? That's an interesting thing. All right, I think we've kind of covered that pretty well. I've got an idea now, you know, what you're thinking, what it's all about, and why it created so much controversy. You know,
I'll tell you this, because there's so much fear. The yoga community is so full of fearful individuals that if that exercise that you observed, those 200 responses, if that did not alert you to the amount of fear and judgment, and again, judgment is fear, righteousness is fear, greed is fear. These are all masks for fear. If it did not alert you to the capacity, just the absolute degree of fearfulness in the yoga community, then nothing possibly could. It was such a hot topic that it brought out everyone's like, oh my God, we're in danger. We're in danger. It's like, who's in danger? I don't understand. Who are you talking? Who's in danger? Because it was all, you know, every person that was commenting on hypothetical situations. What if? And what happens then? And what's this? And like, my goodness, it must be fun to live with you. Must be an awesome life.
Is that not a judgment right there?
There's a difference between judgment and discernment. Judgment reaches a conclusion that the answer is in front of you. A discernment is to see the difference. I can see the difference between living with a person who's living in love and in courage and in faith, or a person who's living in fear and in desperation. There is a difference. And I prefer to live with a person, interact with people, be in relationship with people who are coming from love and not from fear. And that's a choice that I get to make.
Okay. So what is it like now that you've written this article, you've had all these comments, other people have written articles in response? You could be possibly the most loved and most hated man in yoga right now.
You know, it occurred to me which was really interesting. It did polarize. It did polarize people. It did not scare me in terms of who I am. I've always spoken this way to my students. Everyone who's ever participated in the Budokan University and in the Budokan artwork with me knows that it's very clear that these are my positions. This is not new for them. It's not shocking. It's not even interesting. It was only interesting for people who don't study with me. But and it was very shocking for people too who didn't get to dialogue with me like you are, because they just read it and they took it for face value, and then they of course interpreted it through their experiences and their personal filters, their subjective awareness, and then made lots of leaps and came to lots of conclusions. So for me, it was interesting to be hated suddenly by this what felt like hate. I don't know, it certainly felt like hate. Yeah. It was interesting to suddenly be hated by what felt like a mass body of people. I mean, 5 different authors wrote rebuttals to my article. Sexual predator. All this guy has is a extraordinary physical practice. He's not intelligent. He's not. This is just some cowboy mouthing off. It was so interesting to see how I showed up for people and how what I triggered for them and what came up for them in their own responses. I had a psychotherapist. She's which was interesting. She's an author and a well-known author. I'm not going to mention her name, but she's a well-known author who wrote a rebuttal to my article. And the rebuttal started off with, "Shame on you, Cameron Shayne." And this is a therapist. Now, I want you to imagine that the last thing that you would ever do as a professional, licensed psychotherapist is look at someone and tell them, "Shame on you." And I thought that was so fascinating. And I wrote to her, I said, first I'd like to say, no, thank you. I'm not interested in being shamed. I'm not interested in your shame. I'm not ashamed. But thank you. And that's fascinating. So I think it's interesting process to experience people's fear in the form of hate and in the form of anger and in the form of jealousy or whatever comes up for people. But and it's also interesting to see people rally around you and, also say, yeah, I believe in you too. And I love you. And you're, you represent me, you represent my voice. But really what comes up for me is I'm not on anyone's side. I'm not in particular. I'm not on any particular side. It really, I just am really just moving through my own experience, and what's true for me is true for me. And whether it's irresponsible or responsible for me to write what I feel is true and not true for me is my choice. Keeping my own journey sort of quiet and to myself and my opinions. So it was painful. I mean, I'm not going to deny that I didn't have a moment where I was like, wow, this is what I've worked with a lot of celebrities over the course of my career. And I really, I lived with them and I traveled with them, and I really didn't understand I understood parts and pieces, but I didn't understand the feeling that they had around dealing with the public and feeling like they were like, gosh, I'm trying to find the right wording, but that they were in a position of vulnerability with the public. I really didn't get that until this happened, and I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to have a large body of people disliking you. And then I thought, my God, what does the president go through? Yeah. I started thinking about being hated by millions of people, which I am not. I'm not even known by probably maybe 400 people know me. But I was like, my goodness, that must be an incredibly interesting experience for the ego to know that millions of people dislike you, and then thousands of those people would like to kill you. And that is, and I have to tell you, it's a fascinating exploration of self. Fascinating. But I have to say, but here's the irony. The backfire of it is that it only made me more well-known. What I don't think these guys understood was when they wrote these articles, they just turned more people on to my work and what I do and made more people curious about my work. And when people actually come in dialogue with me and see me teach, they're like, wow, okay, this is not what I thought this guy was going to be. And I like that. I love playing the underdog. I love people reaching these conclusions about me and then practicing and having all that melt away, because at the end of the day, I just love people. I really love people. Have no intention to ever hurt or harm another human being. I really, really love people. And if you've ever been around me, which you have, you'll see that love comes out in the way I teach, in the way that I connect with humans. I am, my mother, I have a phenomenal family. I was raised with phenomenal ethics and values, and those will never leave me. So I will always show up in the space that I occupy as what I consider to be a good man, a kind man, and do my very best to really facilitate love and freedom and liberation for people.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty awesome. That sounds like a really good place to stop, actually, because I think you summed it all up right about there. Yeah, I don't think I have any more questions. It's been such a pleasure to speak to you, Cameron. And like I said, when I read through those articles and those comments, it was very hard for me to discern what the hell's going on here, because there was so much noise, you know. And so having an opportunity to speak with you, so now I can just, you know, take it on board myself without filtering it through other people's ideas.
If I could end with one thought, it's this. It's this. Exactly as you said, there's so much noise. It's just story. Mm-hmm. People just making up story. It's all a chatter. It's all this going on in the head. When there's silence, there's nothing but silence. And we make up stories in order to, you know, to give us a sense of safety and certainty. And when you let go of that story of whether of safety and certainty, which you're never safe and certain, when you let go of that story, you're truly liberated. That's when you're truly free. So all I can say is that's what yoga ultimately is: liberation. Liberation from what? From the story of the ego, who we are, what we believe, what we've seen, what we've heard, what we think is reality, when really it's all just perception.
Mm-hmm. And yet, at the same time, perception is all we have. It's how we navigate our way in the world, isn't it? So might as well choose a good one.
That's the dance. That's the dance.
It is the dance.